The other, by Ted Hughes, appeared in his 1990 poetry collection Capriccio, which explores his tumultuous relationship with the aspiring poet Assia Wevill. Both married to other people, Hughes to the American poet Sylvia Plath and Wevill to the Canadian poet David Wevill, they embarked on an affair soon after meeting in 1961. Plath committed suicide in 1963 while separated from Hughes, and Wevill moved into the home that Hughes and Plath had bought in Devon, where she looked after Hughes's 2 children. Wevill gave birth to her own daughter with Hughes, Shura, in 1965. The spectre of Sylvia Plath was a continual presence hanging over the pair's complex and fraught relationship. Not only did Wevill's family and social circle ostracise her, but Plath's success as a poet eclipsed Wevill's own. To add insult to injury, Wevill was frustrated not only by Hughes's continued reluctance to marry her, but also by the way she felt he treated her as his housekeeper. In 1969, it all became too much, and she too committed suicide, killing their then 4-year-old daughter Shura at the same time. Steve Ely on the Ted Hughes Society website describes the other as Hughes's imagining of Wevill's attitude to and relationship with Sylvia Plath. The poem explores the theme of jealousy and how its futile and destructive nature leads to tragic consequences. In the poem, the speaker addresses an unspecified you, taken to be Wevill, and describes the way in which Hughes imagines how Wevill's hatred for and personal and professional jealousy of Plath caused her to chip away at Plath's happiness until she had nothing left to live for. Hughes suggests that his wife's talent, poetic output and fame were too much for Wevill to bear, and so, not content with only taking away Plath's husband and lover, she felt compelled to systematically strip everything else away that she had. The poem drips with sarcasm as Hughes imagines Wevill's self-justification as her own insecurities drove his wife further and further down the path towards suicide. Ironically, Plath's poetry became even more celebrated after her death. Her most famous collection, Ariel, edited by Hughes himself, which must have fueled Wevill's jealousy and inferiority complex even further, and published after her death in 1963, cemented her reputation as a prominent figure in 20th century literature. The poem comprises 3 stanzas of 4, 12 and 13 lines. It is written in free verse, which means that it has neither a regular base meter nor a fixed rhyme scheme. Line lengths are irregular, ranging from 3 to 12 syllables, and Hughes combines these with techniques such as enjambment and caesura to draw attention to particular words and phrases, and to create a disjointed, uneasy rhythm which reinforces Hughes's bitter and contemptuous tone. Hughes' diction is reasonably plain and straightforward, and lacks much of the lyrical beauty to be found in his earlier nature poems. He does, however, make some use of figurative language, such as metaphor, e.g., even her life was trapped in the heap you took, and simile, e.g., like a crossed-out page tossed into a basket. The way that Hughes only refers to Wevill as you and Plath as she, without definitively identifying either of them, gives the poem a very personal and intimate feel, as though he is talking directly to Wevill beyond the grave, and no explanations are, therefore, necessary. While the other may be somewhat lacking in poetical language, it more than makes up for this in its relentless force and raw emotion. Repetition features heavily in this poem. Written in the form of an apostrophe to Hughes's dead partner, the second-person pronoun you is repeated no fewer than 15 times. The past tense of the verb to have, e.g. had, in terms of its meaning to possess, is repeated 9 times, while the past tense of the verb to take, e.g. took, is repeated 5 times. This repetition, in some cases in very close proximity, creates a relentless and oppressive feeling which vividly evokes Hughes's bitterness. Hughes also draws extensively on a semantic field of quantity, encompassing words and expressions that convey different levels, degrees, or states of amount and volume, which cover a spectrum from total presence to complete absence, such as everything, too much, heap, your fill, some, a little touch of, vacuum, and absolutely nothing, with a number of these being repeated. The poem has a circular structure in that the final 3 lines contain the same language as the first 4, although there is a subtle change. The roles are reversed as the pendulum has swung back. Rather than Wevill taking away what she felt Plath had too much of in life, it is now Plath taking away from Wevill from beyond the grave. Hughes's message seems to be that jealousy is ultimately a self-destructive and futile emotion, causing pain and distress to everyone involved. Hughes's use of syntax is interesting in this poem. Note how he, for nearly all of the poem, puts Plath at the beginning of his sentences. She had too much, so with a smile you took some. Even if that means inverting the syntax and placing the dependent clause at the beginning in a fronted adverbial. Because her great luck made you feel unlucky, you had redressed the balance. This puts Plath in a preeminent position and implicitly communicates Hughes's belief in her superiority, that her talent was there first and that Wevill was just a parasitic wannabe, feeding off it and taking it for herself. Hughes also deliberately creates a number of sentence fragments, which is where a dependent clause is separated from its main clause by a full stop. In formal writing, this is considered ungrammatical, but in creative writing, this is a deliberate stylistic choice to draw attention to the dependent clause by giving it the same status as a main clause, e.g., which left her absolutely nothing. The short title, The Other, is enigmatic in that it is never specified to whom it refers. Does it refer to Assia Wevill, who was the other in terms of her being Hughes's other woman, the mistress of a married man? Or does it refer to Sylvia Plath, whose perhaps unnameable presence, first in life and then in death, haunted Wevill and Hughes's illicit relationship from the very beginning? The first short stanza begins with the assertion that she had too much, so with a smile you took some. Note the use of the conjunction so here, which conveys what Hughes perceives as Wevill's self-justification for her actions, her value judgment that Plath had an excess, perhaps of talent and fame, making it reasonable for her to remove some of it. This is further enhanced by the monosyllabic nature of this line. The way in which she took some with a smile suggests her disingenuousness, deceit, and sadistic enjoyment, and perhaps alludes to the way the 2 couples were initially friends. The hissing sibilants of so with a smile you took some also seems to evoke the slyness of Wevill's actions. Note how Hughes is damning in his judgment of Wevill's own gifts. Of everything she had, you had absolutely nothing, so you took some. The use of enjambment here, causing a visual separation between the two parts of the sentence, serves to emphasise not only how the pair of women were poles apart in Hughes's estimation, but also how he felt Wevill perceived it as a zero-sum game. The antithetical everything and nothing is further underscored by the modifier absolutely, which serves to communicate Hughes's disdain and grim satisfaction in this damning indictment of Wevill's talents. The stanza ends on the short line, "at first, just a little," which suggests Wevill may have tried to fool herself that she wasn't doing anything particularly wrong, and that what she took probably wouldn't be missed. Note how the length of this first stanza reflects the littleness of what Wevill took, although the adverbial "at first" hints that this will be the thin end of the wedge. This hint is found to be correct, as the second stanza is 3 times as long as the first, and indicates that once Wevill got a taste for it, she couldn't help herself from carrying on in her destruction of Plath's dignity and sense of self-confidence and self-worth. The second stanza begins, "Still she had so much she made you feel your vacuum, which nature abhorred, so you took your fill, for nature's sake." It seems that the little she had already taken was insufficient to satisfy her. Plath's overabundance of talent made Wevill realise, in comparison, that she herself was a vacuum, or completely empty, and so she had to completely destroy her, so that the comparison could no longer be made. The second line refers to Aristotle's theory that nature abhors or hates a vacuum. In other words, empty spaces are seen as unnatural, and the universe will always seek to fill them in order to maintain its equilibrium or balance. Once more, we get the image of Wevill, the parasite, taking her fill or helping herself, all the while justifying it as what was best for nature. He continues, "Because her great luck made you feel unlucky, you had redressed the balance, which meant now you had some too for yourself." The enjambment here drives the poem relentlessly forward and evokes the way in which Hughes perceived that Wevill was equally relentless in her goal to bring Plath down. Note how he deliberately forms a sentence fragment through cutting the dependent clause, "as seemed only fair," off from its preceding main clause. The way in which he does this not only draws attention to it, but also, by making it into an afterthought, evokes Hughes' sarcastic tone. "Still," he continues, "her ambition claimed the natural right to screw you up like a crossed-out page tossed into a basket." The simile, "like a crossed-out page tossed in a basket," evokes how he imagines that Wevill perceived Plath as flaunting her own talent, which, in turn, made her feel as irrelevant as a casually discarded, scribbled-out first draft of a poem. This image is particularly apposite, alluding as it does to the professional jealousy that Wevill felt towards Plath. Hughes now goes even further as he condemns Wevill for her self-righteousness. Somebody, on behalf of the gods, had to correct that hubris. The word hubris comes from ancient Greek literature and refers to excessive pride and arrogance, which was often followed by nemesis, a form of retribution or punishment. In other words, he is suggesting that Wevill has cast herself in the role of nemesis, so she thought it well within her right to bring Plath down a peg or two, because she had got too big for her boots. A little touch of hatred steadied the nerves, he concludes the stanza. Note that we usually refer to nerves being steadied by a touch of alcohol, and this image serves to underline Wevil's evil intent. The alliterated, aspirated sound of hubris and hate adds to the malevolent tone. The third stanza begins, "Everything she had won, the happiness of it, you collected as your compensation for having lost." Note the alliteration of the guttural k sound in collected and compensation here. The harshness of their sounds and Hughes's contempt, emphasised by their placement at the end of two very short lines. Once more, Hughes creates a sentence fragment which left her absolutely nothing. The division of the line and its resulting enjambment and caesura heavily underscoring the ramifications of Wevil's undermining of Plath and the high price that he felt she unjustly paid. Hughes's bitterness continues to build as he reflects on how the process inexorably led to Plath's suicide, and he lays the blame for this firmly at Wevil's door. "Even her life was trapped in the heap you took. She had nothing." Note how enjambment is once more used for emphasis, as the reader's attention is drawn to the word trapped, and how the metaphor heap suggests Wevil's greed and the indiscriminating manner in which she took from her. The sentence, "she had nothing," is short and sharp, its brevity evoking how little Plath had left. Hughes now switches his attention to the effect that Plath's suicide had on Wevill herself, and he signals this by featuring her at the beginning of each sentence, rather than Plath. "Too late you saw what had happened. It made no difference that she was dead." Even though Plath was no longer there physically, her spectre still hung over Wevill. "Now that you had all she ever had, you had too much." This might also be an allusion to the fame or infamy that Wevill would have got from being the other woman and the cause of Plath's suicide. The tables had turned, and it was now Wevill who had too much. Note how the diacope in this line, with the repetition of the verb had 4 times in quick succession, creates a weighty rhythm and evokes the heavy psychological burden that Wevill now had to bear. The final 3 lines of the poem return to its beginning, as Hughes uses the same language. "Only you saw her smile as she took some. At first, just a little." The difference, however, is that it is now Wevill who is on the receiving end, as nature once more strives to fill a vacuum. The way it was only you who saw her smile as she took some evokes how Wevill was now trapped in her own private hell, with the ultimate lack of satisfaction she gained from destroying her rival beginning to chip away at her own mental health. The way in which the poem ends on the line, "At first, just a little," ominously hints at Wevill's downward spiral that ultimately led to the murder of her child and her own suicide some 6 years later. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.